Hi, everybody. My name is Aram Bajakian, and I am a PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and I'm also a guitarist and oudist and composer. And I'm really excited to be here today as a guest host for Early Music Vancouver's Intimate Conversations podcast with Kyriakos Kalaitzidis, who is joining us from Thessaloniki. He formed the En Chordais ensemble in 1993 and will be performing with Early Music Vancouver in collaboration with Ensemble Constantinople, which is directed by Kyriakos Kalaitzidis. And they are presenting works newly discovered from Byzantine manuscripts dating from 1480 to 1800. One thing I'm really interested in knowing, Kyriakos, is these manuscripts really cover a wide range of music. And we think about like Western art music, like, it covers Monteverdi, who was born in 1567, Bach was born in 1685, Mozart 1756, Beethoven 1770. So it's a wide range going from, Renaissance, late Renaissance through Baroque, classical, and then go to the late classical and Romantic era. And how do these manuscripts sort of relate to that, and do they change over time in the way that classical in Europe did?
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. It's my pleasure to be part of this so interesting conference series. I have to point first that the music of that region cover, the Middle East, let's say, region, for centuries was a kind of oral tradition. Arabs, Iranians, Turks transmitted there and play their music orally and teach their music orally. And it was only the middle of 19th century when almost concurrently Arabs, Iranians, and Turks adopted Armenian reformed notation or staff notation, devising extra modulation signs in parallel, in order to present the intervallic variety of their music tradition. So the Byzantine, post-Byzantine music manuscript is almost the most important written source for these musical traditions, including, of course, the Greek tradition. Coming, as you already said, from late 14th, early 15th century to early 19th century, where we have the first printed collection. And this happened because in Greek musical tradition, let's say, in Greek musical civilization, in other words, we have the concept of written music from the antiquity. It was a kind of alphabetical notation, and then in Byzantine music we have since middle of 10th century we have this notation, neumatic notation, serving the church music, of course, and then it came the idea to use this notation in order to write down secular music, and not only Greek secular music, Byzantine secular music, but also Ottoman, Persian, Arabic, and so on. And that's very, very valuable because the written sources give us the opportunity to going back through the security, let's say, of the written tradition instead of the oral tradition.
That's fascinating. I happen to be reading. I've brought this book about Cantemir.
Yes.
And I don't know,
Cantemir and Bobovsky are the only two exceptions who wrote down music of the Ottoman court. Bobovsky in 1651 and Cantemir around 1700. This is the only two exceptions. But we should think about that the Byzantine and post-Byzantine musical sources regarding secular music, I point this, regarding secular music, constitute an amount of 4,400 pages of manuscripts.
That's
in
amazing.
yes, in different libraries, of course, different manuscripts in different libraries nowadays.
And so, do you know how to read that notation, or is that like a whole other specialty that
Ah,
people?
that's a very good question. Thank you. Actually, we have four periods of Byzantine and post-Byzantine music notation. So, what is in use nowadays all around in the Greek Orthodox Church and also Romanian, Serbian, and so on, Arabic Orthodox Church, is the notation that has been reformed in the fourth period. That means after 1814. But the vast of the sources is from the previous periods. That means it's a kind of stenography. This is the Greek word. In other words, short notice, short writing, writing, and the transcription for this old method to the new method that is readable for anyone or into staff notation needs about 50 to 80 hours per manuscript page. So
Amazing.
as a second step, yes, as a second step after my PhD dissertation that has been published in English, by the way, and both in English and in Greek. In English by the Orient Institute in Istanbul, going back on 2012. We started with my colleague, Professor Thomas Apostolopoulos, the work of transcription into staff notation in order these musical treasures be available for any musician or researcher, scholar, and so on. And a book has been published by the Musical University of Bucharest on 2019, having as content exactly some of these musical treasures transcribed into staff notation. And this is the basis of our concert repertoire in Vancouver.
Amazing. I'm so excited to hear this music. The one other thing I was wondering about in terms of, because it might just be because it's what I'm reading about now, but when you're transcribing this to Western notation, I know in the Makam system there's microtones, and are
Mhm.
those considered in these transcriptions?
Byzantine music and Greek musical civilization share the common elements with the rest musical tradition of the area. That means modality. That means not only microtones, that is a part of what we call modality, but also the construction of the melodies and so on. So, of course, 100% sure, we take into account these, microtones, these delicate, let's say, intervals. That's why we following the system for staff notation, devising extra modulation signs in order to represent the intervallic variety of those musical traditions. And I have to point here something that is very important as well, that the earliest manuscript sources refer to Persian art music and, of course, Byzantine secular music, the oldest. Then, by the late 17th and mostly early 18th century, we have the sources refer to Ottoman court music.
Yeah. So it's for sort of the non-musically inclined or the non-musicians, if you think about like a piano keyboard, the notes C and D, and there's just one pitch in between that C and D, C sharp, and we're talking about a
Yeah,
range of pitches. Like now, I think it's about nine is what's commonly said, but I don't know if there's more in some of these. So it's a much more nuanced sense of pitch, I would say.
yeah. It's look. This is. I think it's the intervals issue. It's more complicated to the large public. But from the other side, this is the main characteristic of our musical traditions. This is the beauty of our musical traditions, the from the antiquity. And I have to go back to Pythagoras. because Pythagoras in Greek, he was the first one who justified the musical intervals using mathematics. He did the connection between maths, and music theory. And what we use up to date in our music theory, it's based to Pythagoras writings and the post Pythagore students and so on.
That's
That's very
fascinating. It's really it's really like a whole. It's literally like like hearing sound in black and white, which is like the piano, and then hearing like a whole color. Not that I don't like harmony. I love harmony and love Western
even
music, but
even Western music before Bach, it was somehow has somehow used these micro intervals.
hmm,
Bach was the first who create these two intervals in order to adapt to the piano, as we know.
hmm,
Anyway, this is another discussion, but
yeah,
I would like to point that the microtones aren't the only one music element
hmm,
for the so-called modal music, and the modal music covers a geographical zone covering the whole Arab world from Morocco to Iraq, nowadays Turkey, Armenia, the Central Asia musical traditions, Iran, of course. So it's a really very large geographical zone who
yeah,
has as main concept the the modality,
right.
using different names. In the Arabs and the Turkish use the name makam. In Central Asia, they use the term mugam. In Iran, they use a term. In Persian art music, they use a term dasga. In Byzantine music, we use the term ichos, that literally means sound, but this is the name we use, and so on. And even the names of each one mode sounds different, more or less are the same. That's why we could be on stage with me as Greek, with an Iranian, with a Turkish musician, with an Iranian, with a Jewish musician, with an Armenian, and playing and understand each other, not under the idea of the fusion or the idea of doing world music or creative. No, because this happened for centuries.
Hmm,
This was the reality for centuries.
right. And you understand the system of Makam or Echos or however it is, and yeah. This
Exactly.
kind of gets into another question I have, which I think we're talking about the range where this music covers, like geographically, and in terms of the oud, which is the instrument that you play.
Mhm.
One thing I've discovered since I started playing it is there's not doesn't seem to be a lot of knowledge with most people about sort of the difference between the oud in Turkey and Greece versus how it is in North Africa versus Iran versus Iraq. Could you speak a little bit to the oud that you play? I'd also love to hear about the luthier of it, but also how is it different from Syrian, Iraqi, Persian, North African ouds?
Look, the oud is like the guitar in the Western world. I mean, anyone somehow plays little oud in all these countries I already described. So that means since has a soul, it's in use in so many different countries and so different cultures. Uh, Differences, bigger or smaller, has been created,
Hmm.
and isn't exactly always those differences couldn't be exactly described according to the national trends. In my opinion, it's something little bit different. I mean, as I has been as I observed, Turkish, Armenians, and Greeks and Jews from this area, they almost follow the same tuning, the same shape, and the same number of strings. Um, it is coming to the Arabic world. It's the differences are more and more, not only in the same, sometimes also in the name as well. I
Hmm.
mean, in North Africa, in Maghreb countries like Tunisia, they use a kind of oud, but they call it oud arbi. And if you see it, it is something between oud and lute. And this is a traditional instrument of that country. After 60s, 70s, the oud sarkı, that means the oud that we all know, became more famous at that country, and more uh, it's very rare, it's very difficult to find oud arbe instead of oud sarkı.
Hmm.
And also in some other cases the tuning is totally different, it's highest, it's much highest. But all these instruments, all this variety of ouds kept the main concept of tetrachords. The oud is tuned in tetrachords. The
Hmm.
distance between the four basic chords is in tetrachord. And
Hmm.
this is very important because this is the mirror of the ancient Greek music theory, that the tetrachord is the main element in order to create music scales and so on.
So tetrachord being like a four note, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, it depends. It could be I mean, if I say it in English because I use the French system, it's a D A E B,
Hmm.
but it could be one tone altogether lower or three notes upper. But
Right.
always the distance is a tetrachord, and that's very important
Hmm. And
because the
and and
tetrachord.
and the luthier of your oud, is it someone who you know, or someone who is in Greece, or how was your oud made?
My oud is made by a Greek luthier in Athens.
Okay.
But I have
Amazing.
to add here, yes, I have to add here that the oud, for instance, appears to the Byzantine tradition under a different name, and this is a very charming story. In Byzantine time, the instrument, like the oud, because we have philological and iconographical descriptions and sources, they call it kithara. That means guitar,
Hmm.
kithara, because they wanted to give and probably a kind of um, um, time depth to the instrument. I mean, because the term kithara, guitar, was in use in the ancient Greece, but for another kind of instrument like harp, this
Hmm.
was kithara in ancient Greece. But originally, the term kithara is coming from the Farsi. The kithara is suturu, that means three strings.
Huh.
And so this is Mediterranean. I mean, a Persian name in use in ancient Greece. Then the Byzantines took it in order to describe another instrument that this is the oud, and
Right.
that's why we have the kithara, the guitar in Western Europe, first of all from Spain and Italy. After the Omeyyads being in Iberia Peninsula, and the first guitars looks very close to the oud.
Hmm.
So the common elements doesn't stop only in the music theory and
Right.
repertoire. it's also in the instruments. And I can say similar stories about kanun,
Right.
another instrument that is canon, the ancient Greek name that means term that means the law,
I'm thinking
and
about like
how this.
the vihuela in Spain, which had movable frets, which allows tuning systems, and also had double sets of strings. So the guitar has
Yeah,
just the one and
exactly.
has the two strings. So
Yeah.
yeah, a music that I've been really loving of late from Greece is Retica music, and I
Mm-hmm.
like because it also has these like influences from many different places. You'll have a singer like Rosa
Mm-hmm.
Eskenazi, who is a Sephardic Jew from Istanbul, playing with an oud player, Hagop Stamboyan, who is Armenian, with a lyra player who's Greek. And what I'm wondering is there any musics, either Rebettica or other musics in Greece, that are related to some of historical musics that you're playing at the concert? Um, and 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 so that's part one. And I would also say, how has this music influenced other musics around the world? Like, has this Greek music that you're playing sort of had an influence on Western music or classical music that most people would know?
First of all, rebetiko, it's a musical phenomenon appeared by the end of 19th, early 20th century. It's a kind of socio-cultural phenomenon. It's not just a musical tradition. I couldn't compare rebetiko with fado
Hmm.
or with blues or
Hmm.
with the tango argentino. So it's the music of the underground in the limits, in the borders of the society, and people. Of course, they used the elements, let's say, of Greek traditional music with
Hmm.
influences from neighboring musical traditions, of course.
Hmm.
In our concerts, we are focusing mainly to the so-called art music or classical music of the East, because according to the sources, what is preserved there, it's related to this kind of music. I mean, it could be court music. Among the composers, we have a shah, a king, that, in other words, of the Persian Empire.
Hmm.
We have composers who served at the Ottoman court. We have composers um, or manuscript writers, scribers who served at the Byzantine court. So those refer to a kind of art music or classical music.
Hmm. It's really
And of
similar to I was reading a biography of Bach, and he's talking about going to the church and how there's folk musicians playing outside of the church,
Mhm.
and how he was worried that they would take some of the work away from the professional musicians, and it gets into a whole thing. But I was like, I wonder what they're playing. How is the influence that he wrote, the music that he wrote, influence his music? And
Absolutely has been. I mean, I couldn't talk about Bach, but talking about this kind of music, of course, there are always trance influences. I mean, the folk music influenced the art music and the opposite.
hmm, exactly.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And this could be observed even in nowadays, because traditional music is very powerful in Greece and very alive. And if you come to Greece, you can find everywhere, all around Greece, festivities, or you can listen to traditional music in different occasions, even weddings or whatever, and it is played by well-educated, but so-called traditional musicians, let's say, playing this music for dance or whatever, and you can easily recognize the connection between the let's say the Oriental stuff and the art music also as well.
Hmm. That's great. It's really fascinating to get to speak with you and to get to hear all of these just get into some of these ideas. And the thing is, I also know that this is all just the very tip of the iceberg that you're talking about. It's just there's so much, so it can go so deep in any
Yeah,
one of these subjects. One
yeah,
thing I was wondering about is, you're playing this, sort of a Byzantine, it's sort of like a classical type music. And I was wondering what were your early years as a musician like? What were you listening to the music around you as you were growing up? Was it more like folk music, or were you listening to punk rock? Were you, or were you playing
yeah.
oud at a young age? Yeah.
I grown up musically into the church, the Byzantine music.
Hmm.
From my very early childhood, I was going to and chanting, and participating in at least as chanter. And then I studied Byzantine music, and also I participate to the festivities of my families. My mother family is coming from Cappadocia, and my father family is coming from Pondos, both in Turkey nowadays. So I grown up with a musical tradition of those lands, and those together constitute my, let's say, music language.
Hmm.
So the step to deeper knowledge of that music was something very natural for me. Was
Hmm.
really natural for me. I mean, no any kind of distance, let's say.
Right.
As audience, of course, as teenager, have been listening rebetiko, also other style of traditional music around Greece, because we have big variety of styles in Greek traditional music. Even if this is a small country, the styles are too many and very different. And then I have started discovering the musical tradition of neighboring countries. Like I have listened a lot of Persian music stuff, Arabic, Turkish, and so on.
Amazing. You just mentioned like the two places that your parents or grandparents, I forget if you said parents or
Yeah,
grandparents are from,
yeah.
but are those styles and ways of playing from those two places different? I mean, I know there's similarities, but were there also differences that you could
Yes,
speak of?
yes, there are differences. There are differences, of course. It's funny. You can observe coming in Greece. You can observe differences from village to village. It's quite funny, this, and interesting at the same time. I do remember years ago, I was the musical supervisor for a documentary series for International Satellite Channel, and we travel all around Greece. And the team of shootings and so on, they every in every next destination has were amazed and surprised by the differences, not only in terms of music but also in the food, in the landscape. It's a small country, but with really big diversity. So,
That's
and the music, it's a kind of mirror of all these, elements.
right. I was speaking to an oud player a few months back, and he was from Syria, and he said you can tell what village someone's from by how flat they make a certain note in Rast Makam. He says
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so it's like, you know, it's
I believe that.
if you hear for the change, the differences are very clear.
I believe that. I believe that. Yeah.
This has been so fascinating, Kyriakos, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you when you're here in Vancouver in just a couple weeks, just less than a month. Um,
Yeah. All right.
he's going to be performing in Victoria with his En Chordais ensemble, and they're also doing a collaboration with Ensemble Constantinople. They're presenting works from newly discovered Byzantine manuscripts dating from 1480 to 800. They're playing Victoria on Friday, September 23rd, 2022 at 7:30 p.m. at Christ Church Cathedral. And then in Vancouver on September 24th 2022 at 7:30 p.m. at Blue Shore Financial Center for the Performing Arts. And also, Kyriakos is also giving a workshop at UBC's college on Monday, September 26th from 5 to 7:30. Information will be included in the link below, and you should be able to also find it on the Early Music Vancouver website. Thank you so much, Kyriakos, and I hope I get to meet you in person when you're here, and we can continue the conversation then.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.